I am pleased to once again play host to Milton Friedman, who is now attached to Stanford. Well, I don't know what attached isn't the word we're looking for. The Hoover Institution, which is what, an academic...
Oh, yes. The Hoover Institution was set up in honor of President Hoover. It's been there for a long time, and it's called the Hoover Institution for War, Revolution, and Peace. And they decided a while back they had enough peace, so they invited me to be a fellow there for a while.
Would Herbert Hoover be pleased with the dialogue that's going on under the aegis of his name?
Oh, I'm sure he would. He was a great student. He was not only an engineer, but the library, it was founded as a library based initially on the collection of documents and manuscripts he had collected in his public career.
Yeah. Am I to assume that you wish that he had defeated FDR in 1930?
That's a very, very complicated question.
Okay, but you're not all crazy about the New Deal, I trust. Huh?
Oh, on the contrary. I think the situation in 1932 was a very terrible situation, but it had been produced by the failures of the Federal Reserve System in the prior 4 years. It was not a failure of capitalism, it was a failure of government. And Herbert Hoover himself, in his memoirs at the end of that time, said he had learned to his sorrow that the Federal Reserve was a weak reed for a nation in time of trouble. So that you can't blame Hoover for the Depression, you can't blame business for the Depression, but Hoover has to take some of the blame.
All right.
Much of what Roosevelt did in the New Deal was unwise, but much of it was necessary. You can't, again, give a black and white judgment.
All right. Let's try some black and white questions, although there are no anathema to economists. One of the wonderful things about you is that when you speak, I almost always understand you, and that's a real breakthrough for you and for me as well. The government should help save Chrysler. We need 3 auto companies.
The government has been helping to kill Chrysler, but it should not help to save Chrysler. Of course not. This is a private enterprise system. It's often described as a profit system, but that's a misleading label. It's a profit and loss system. And the loss part is even more important than the profit, because it's what gets rid of badly managed, poorly operated companies.
What does?
Losses. When Chrysler loses money.
Oh, I see. So, all right.
When Chrysler loses money, it's got to do something. When Amtrak loses money, it goes to Congress and gets a bigger appropriation. The question at issue is, should the people in this country bail out Chrysler by taking money out of their pockets, not to buy cars which they want to buy, but to pay for whatever has been the cause of the losses at Chrysler? Government has been responsible for many of those losses by unrealistic regulations and rules, but they've affected all of the companies.
You're not going to condemn regulations regarding emission and...
I certainly am. Of course I'm going to condemn them. Why not?
Because if we don't have them, you're not going to be able to breathe, and you and I will not be in our senior years able to sit around and argue with each other.
Well, those are assertions. They are statements that are made, but they are far from being correct. The fact is that pollution was going down long before we had any emission requirements, and it would go down without them. There is a case for doing something about pollution, but the way we've been going about it is the wrong way.
Is there a case for the government to do something about it?
Yes, there is a case for the government to do something about it, because there's always a case for the government to some extent when what 2 people do affects a third party. There's no case for the government whatsoever in mandating airbags, because airbags protect the people inside the car. That's my business. If I want to protect myself, I should do it at my expense. But there is a... But there is a case for the government protecting third parties, protecting people who have not voluntarily agreed to enter. So there's more of a case, for example, for emission control than there is for airbags. But the question is, what's the best way to do it? And the best way to do it is not to have bureaucrats in Washington write rules and regulations saying that a car has to carry this, that, or the other. The best way to do it is to impose a tax on the amount of pollutants emitted by a car and make it in the self-interest of the car manufacturers and of the consumers to keep down the amount of pollution in that way.
But how would you put a monetary value on particulate matter which is emitted from the end of an exhaust pipe?
You do it now. What do you mean, how do you do it? You now require people to spend something like $500 per car for the purpose, supposedly, of reducing particulate matter, which means for the purpose of giving them an incentive to disconnect the equipment that's supposed to reduce pollution.
You mean the owner? People are going out of their way.
Yeah.
Same with the buzzer. I assume that you... have you ever met Ralph Nader?
Of course. I've debated Ralph Nader many times.
And I assume you feel that... what is it that troubles you about him?
I think he's wrong. I don't have any doubt about his sincerity, but I think sincerity is a much overrated virtue. I think what troubles me about him is that he wants to run my life for me instead of letting me run my life.
Let's just take a couple of things. If it weren't for Ralph Nader, we would still have those ornaments on the hoods of cars which impale babies and women and children crossing streets. We would still have an auto industry which is totally focused on cosmetics at the expense of sound automotive engineering. We would still have we'd still have an automobile business and its ancillary supplier of tires with difficulties that would be sent out to the public without regard to any problem at all of being asked to account for them.
You know, the problem with claims like that is that they don't stand up to the facts. Now, take the most famous case. You know Ralph Nader got his start by a book called Unsafe at Any Speed. It referred to the Corvair. Do you know that 10 years after he launched his attack and persuaded the public at large that the Corvair was an unsafe car, the federal government finally got around to investigating the safety of the Corvair. And its official report concluded that the Corvair was a perfectly safe car, just as safe as the alternatives available, and that Ralph Nader's claims were completely unjustified.
Yeah. Why?
So that similarly with all of you, those extravagant claims, which I know you're not making on your own behalf, you're the devil's advocate, and a very good devil, too.
Thank you, I think.
And a very good advocate, too. So, but the trouble with all
Excuse me, I just want to make this point, Professor Friedman. You are using the United States government, whose post office is often referred to by you in columns, in speeches, and in writings as an example of what happens when you give what ought to be the private enterprise's business to the United States government. Now you turn around and use this United States bureaucracy to support your defense of Ralph Nader. I mean, why should I have any more confidence in the government's review of the Corvair than in the government's operation of the post office?
You shouldn't. I have no more confidence in that.
Well, you certainly cited it to
I beg your pardon. I just have as much confidence in it as I do in Ralph Nader's evaluation.
So we're evensies then?
That's right.
So
All
then
I say is there is no evidence. No one, neither Ralph Nader nor anyone else, has ever presented any evidence that justifies his charges. No one has presented evidence to justify the kind of charges you're making, and those charges are simply untrue. It is not a fact that the world would have come to an end but for Ralph Nader. But more important, take one of those charges, that the cars would be devoted to cosmetics. If people want to spend their money on cosmetics, why shouldn't they? You mean to say you should be prohibited by the government from doing whatever you do to have to give a nice cosmetic image to your viewers?
No, I guess I'm thinking that if we just leave it to Detroit, if we had just left it to Detroit in your own laissez-faire and you're wearing your Adam Smith tie today.
Always wear it on TV.
I know. Let me tell you what I think. Let's just tell me what's wrong with this.
Sure.
If we just, you know, tell now Ralph Nader to go somewhere else and complain.
Sure.
And let's let Detroit and the free enterprise system handle this. Here's what we would not have. We would not have collapsible steering wheels. We would not have padded dashboards. We would not have spring-loaded ornaments that bend back so that you minimize injury in the case of hitting a pedestrian. You would not have...
Well, first of all, I have no reason to suppose that's true. Long before Ralph Nader came on the picture, the automobile industry had made cars increasingly safe. Brakes had become better. The protection on the bumpers had become better. The doors had become better. When it turned out they were defective, the automobile industry introduced them. Almost all of the developments in automobile in that direction had arrived and were on the way long before Ralph Nader came along. But if you didn't have Ralph Nader, if you hadn't had that movement, you also would have cars considerably cheaper. You'd have them available to a much wider range of people. They would be using less gas than they do now, not more gas than they do now. After all, the thing that amazes me about people who make statements like this is their neglect of history. This country went for close to 200 years without a Ralph Nader and without these regulations. And that was a period in which this country had its greatest growth, in which people streamed to it from all over the world and were able to make a better life for themselves and their children. If you take the automobile industry in particular, since Henry Ford really revolutionized it, it transformed the nature of life in this country. The automobiles improved tremendously. They came down in cost relative to other goods. The effect of the kind of regulations you now have has been to make automobiles not more safe, but less safe. Why? Because by making them more expensive, they make it pay to keep an old car on the road longer. The average age of cars on the road has gone up, and old cars are less safe than new cars. By making